Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Paul Brooker, and I am joined by the one and only Lee Dundas. Hello, Lee. How are we doing?
I'm great, Paul. Thanks so much for having me on again today.
Brilliant. It's always a pleasure to have you back on. But just for anyone new out there who's tuned in today, could you just give us a brief overview about who you are?
Yeah, so I used to be a normal attorney, well, for a while anyway. I went to law school. I got into Yale Law School when I was 17 years old. I'd skipped high school, so a bit of a quick trajectory. And then I got stuck doing a bunch of boring stuff. I was representing Fortune 500 companies, and that was all well and good. And then I had a kid, helped my husband raise the kid for a while, did the soccer mom thing. And then almost 15 years ago now, I got an opportunity to start busting brothels in Asia, child brothels in Asia, and running undercover crews of like former Navy SEAL type guys, former SWAT guys into the brothels posing as, sex buyers, pedophiles. And they would gather the intel through their through all their technology, their little, 007 wristwatches that we actually bought from England, from where you're sitting right now. All the good stuff came out of England back in the day. And they do their James Bond move and get the goods on the bad guys, and we try to take the brothels out, and the bad guys put them in jail, the sellers and the buyers of these girls, and then we get the girls help. And that was a lot more fun than representing Fortune 500 companies in very boring litigation in California. But then, 5 years ago, the crazy hit the planet, and I'm like you and Charlie and everybody else probably watching your show and tuning in today. I kind of hate injustice. It chaps my hide, as my best friend from junior high used to say. And I just grabbed my Walmart bullhorn and started screaming out the crazy and doing very innovative things. I was the unseen hand behind the US convoy, helped put the Canadian convoy together as well prior to that. We were still locked down at that point in January, February of 2022, and 26 states were. And within a month of me announcing on February 4th that we were going to do a convoy on February 26th, one by one, every blue state that was still closed down opened back up, because the White House didn't want, they wanted to make our convoy look moot because they didn't want an Occupy Ottawa situation on their side of the dividing line up there in the Northeast in DC. So I did that. Blew the whistle when the colonels were calling out how all of our military were dropping like flies from the COVID mandate. And we went in front of Senator Ron Johnson in DC. I was the one who put all that together. The colonels actually contacted me. Yeah, I did little stuff like getting health officers fired here in my county and my state, because if you mandate unconstitutional bull crap, I feel like it's my personal responsibility to take you out from your job, figuratively speaking, not physically. And we did a lot of that. We got a lot of people fired, and we got our states and our counties open back up. And very proud of the work we did, because I think without Charlie Ward and Lee Dundas and those military colonels and a bunch of other people out there, Peter McCullough, Malone, who were calling out the fact that this was unconstitutional and a genocidal weapon, I think we'd be living in Auschwitz right now. So that's what I was doing for the last 5 years. But speaking of scary stuff, there's some new scary drops that have been trending their way around Twitter or X the past week. And that's why I picked up the phone and called your gals and said, hey, I don't know if you've seen this release that Edward Snowden allegedly did about HAARP, the high frequency active auroral research program that allegedly my government is tinkering with up in the wilderness in Alaska. But there's some new stuff, allegedly new stuff coming out about that, and I think our people should know.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right, Lee, and thank you for that beautiful introduction about yourself and where you've been, because I know you are a massive freedom fighter out there, more so to protect the children. And honestly, go back, watch our previous interviews with Lee, because wow, she is fighting the Lord's fight. Um, yes, as you were saying about high frequency HAARP, dare I say it, we can touch on chemtrails as well with that, because I believe they all work together. Edward Snowden, one of the greatest whistleblowers of our time. I mean, he put himself right out there and risked everything to get the truth out there, and I tip my hat to him. But Lee, what specifically are you here to talk about today?
Well, I got a post across my own social media. I'm not on X, but people send me links, and I clicked on it, and it was about a week ago now, and it was a guy by the name of Paul Gold Eagle, and he was talking about the fact that allegedly that he had heard that Snowden had done a new whistleblowing type release about this high frequency active auroral research program, aka codename acronym HAARP. What we know for sure is HAARP does exist. And basically, over 33 acres, and they've got like 180 antenna and little beamy equipment up in the backwoods of Alaska. They have been beaming these high frequencies up into the stratosphere, the part of our atmosphere that's from 50 miles off the planet's crust all the way up to 600 miles. They're aiming for that zone. And they've been doing this for a while, and everybody's sort of heard about it. I think a lot of people in our circles were like, oh, yeah, that's probably what's behind all the weird meteorological weather effects we've been experiencing across the planet, but especially here in the US, tornadoes and hurricanes in places they shouldn't be, or that do 90-degree turns and go up into the hills where you don't normally see them and create massive floods or massive fires here in California. Um, and I think that that's sort of well known, but allegedly what this new Snowden release was, hey folks, this HAARP program, HAARP, by the way, is a joint project between US Air Force, US Navy, and DARPA. And that's kind of all you need to really know from my book, because you hear those three guys, groups are playing ball together, it probably ain't up to any good, right? They ain't up to good stuff for the planet, right? They're probably doing some pretty serious monkeying and tinkering, and maybe it's for good, but there's probably at least a military or a bad application that can grow out of that project too. So those are the three groups that were behind it for the last however many years it's been out. But what the guy said Snowden was about to break or had broken loose with was it's not designed to screw with our weather or screw with our planet or screw with that kind of stuff. It is actually designed to screw with our mind and control our emotions and our mental health for better, or in this case for worse, was the allegation. Now, to be fair, if you go Google this recent X drop, all the mainstream media outlets are like, oh, there was no such Snowden release, and fact check, that's completely false, which tells you again everything you probably need to know about the reality of it. But the reason I wanted to hop on your show today is whether or not Snowden did or didn't do anything last week with reference to HAARP and what he's saying about HAARP and the fact that HAARP may or may not be being used to control our mind, paranoid schizophrenic style here, that technology to actually control our mood and our health physically and emotionally and mentally and make us see and hear things that aren't actually occurring in the physical universe around us. That technology has been out for well longer than you and I have been alive. I'm talking since the 50s. So I did a deep dive probably about 2 years ago now. And it was after that October date where in America and maybe even around the world, the cell phone companies were going to make that really weird frequency come through our phones just to do sort of an emergency broadcast. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not buying it. I'm turning my phone off. I'm putting it in a Faraday cage. I'm unplugging every electrical device in my entire vicinity. My husband and I are going to put little foil hats on and turn our breaker off at the box for that day. I do not trust what's coming through the phone lines or anything else. But I had this Russian contractor who had agreed to do an estimate on our house for some project we were going to do, and he wanted to come over the day in question. And I said, all right, buddy, you can come over, but forewarned, I'm going to be having my candles going, and do not bring your cell phone out of your car into my house. So he knocks on the door, and I open the door to this massive, Ivan kind of, Arnold Schwarzenegger looking guy. And I said, did you leave your cell phone off and in your car? And he goes, well, to be totally transparent, I like got lost coming here. You're kind of hard to find. And I had to turn it on to use my GPS. And even though it was after the appointed hour that the test was going to be going, it was like 2 hours later. He goes, my phone made a horrific noise and vibration, and it made me feel awful, and I immediately powered it back down. And I want you to know, I'm from Russia. I'm from Russia. And my government has been using frequencies for very bad ends for a very long time. Or I was like, yeah, I know. I agree. Come on in, and we're going to take a flashlight and look at my house, and you can do the estimate now. And then I went upstairs, the next day to have lunch, and I thought, okay, I believe in frequencies. Obviously, they exist. That's how we hear things, and whatever. But what do I really know about what our governments have been up to? Like, I assume they're doing bad and good stuff with them, but that's kind of all I knew at the time. So I Google it, Paul. I literally go to Google, not DuckDuckGo, and I start typing in frequencies. My husband's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just gonna, spend 10 minutes while I'm eating my lunch just looking at this whole issue that kind of got my attention after yesterday." 2 weeks later, and like 398 browser tabs all over my computer. I mean, it looks like when you won the solitaire game in like the 1980s. I mean, I got browser tabs coming out my ears. The dogs are running around with browser tabs open on their head. Like, I was all the way down the freaking rabbit hole and out the other end in China, like you name it, right? First thing I came across was our Havana embassy, our American embassy in Cuba, right after Trump took office the first time. Not during the second round, but the first time. Had you heard about the hit that they did using frequencies on that embassy? You ever heard about it, Paul?
No, not that specific instance, Lee. I've heard about frequencies being used over in the China Tibet region to make people violently sick, and
Yeah.
I've talked. I could talk hours on this, Lee. So I'll let you go ahead with this one, and then I'll chime in a bit.
Fair enough. Well, the first thing I stumbled across is a CNN clip. We're talking mainstream media is now reporting on this. And they're like, yeah, so what started happening was all of the American embassy workers down in Cuba started reporting that they felt really, really sick, really awful. They were, getting headaches. They were hearing ringing in their ears. And the State Department was like, oh my gosh, what the heck is going on? We need to send some doctors down there. And so they did. And they went down and they looked at these guys neurologically. 100% of the 25 workers that were being affected had objective findings of balance disorders. Their inner ear was off. And they were super abnormal findings, the guys said, the doctor said, not just a little off. They were super abnormal findings and very disturbed patterns of cognition. But ironically, this was only happening when they were at work or in their sleeping quarters. When they were in the middle of Havana buying fruit for dinner, they were fine. And then they'd go back to the embassy region and they'd be sick as dogs. And so that was sort of the first thing. I forgot to ask you before we started recording here, did you have that first CNN clip queued up? And if not, if you share your screen, I could probably play it from my end. Do you want me to try to share a screen right now?
Yes,
Okay,
if
let
you could, please, Lee. You are now co-host.
Okay, so here's that CNN clip, guys. Here we go.
Of unexplained illnesses, including head injuries, forced the U.S. to bring home diplomatic staff from China and Cuba. The scientist who led the investigation tells the New York Times the main culprit is likely some kind of microwave weapon.
It all began November 2016, right after the U.S. presidential election, and that is when U.S. diplomats based here in Havana said they begin to experience these really strange symptoms, often at night, sometimes while they're in bed, asleep in their homes or their hotel rooms here in Cuba, and they said that they would feel nausea, hear loud sounds, hearing loss, but if they got up out of bed, if they left the room where they were in, it would stop. If they walked back into where they had felt this incident, this attack as they described it, it would start again. So they felt that they were being targeted with some sort of mysterious beam of energy. Now we have scientists saying that perhaps it's a microwave weapon that shoots a beam of energy, and it can be pinpointed in the way these diplomats described both here in Cuba and in China, and that it can actually cause people to think they're hearing sounds, but this is just a symptom of this beam of energy. We don't know very little bit about these weapons because so few countries use them.
There are a couple things from that reporting, that there is some place of blame, or at least looking seriously at Russia. And then the other is, it's not just a very disturbing high-pitched noise, but there might even be voices or a message, a continual message.
There are a number of countries, including the former Soviet Union and now Russia, that have microwave weapon programs going back decades. There's some evidence that they've been used in other countries against U.S. diplomats, that this was a very active program. And it's kind of the perfect weapon because it leaves no trace.
Yeah, I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Perfect weapon leaves no trace. You heard the male correspondent there at the end say, by the way, Russia's had these programs going back decades. So that really caught my attention. And I was like, really? So the next thing I come across is Moscow. 1960, Moscow. All of a sudden, our American embassy workers are reporting similar things to what the Cuban ones were, 5 years ago. They're like, oh, we can't think. Our decision making is for the birds. Like, what is going on? So our CIA gets very curious. They're like, oh, it sounds like the Russians are doing something to our people. And the CIA lets it go 2 years, from 1960 to 1962. And then they're like, okay, something's going on. And they start Project Pandora. And they put into the American embassy in Moscow like monkeys and lab rats to see how these guys are faring. Like, is the State Department and the embassy just having a massive hallucination? Or are these, guinea pigs, as it were, actual guinea pigs that they put in, also suffering? And sure enough, the monkeys are not able to do their puzzles. The rats can't find the cheese in the maze. 40% increase. They draw the blood of the American embassy workers. 40% increase in the white cell count. The American ambassador dies of like some weird leukemia-like disease. And the State Department and CIA are like, yeah, pretty clear something's going on. Do they tell our workers over there? Nope. They just use the humans as lab rats. From 1960 until I'm 3 years old in 1975, a decade and a frickin' half, it's very obvious they are being beamed with frequencies, and at no point does America cop to it or pull our people out. No, until Kissinger sends a telegram to the Moscow embassy entitled Subject Radiation and Electromagnetic Dangers in 1975, when I'm 3 years old. And he says in this telegram, hey guys, beginning in 1960, the Soviet Union directed high frequency beams of radiation at the US Embassy in Moscow, which were calculated not to pick up intelligence, but rather to cause physiological effects on the personnel on the ground. The effects that the Soviets calculated to achieve in our personnel included malaise, irritability, and extreme fatigue. At the time, the Soviets believed the effects would be temporary. You know where this is going. But subsequently, it's been verified that the effects were anything but temporary, and they were definitely tied to things like cataracts, blood changes that induced heart attacks, malignancies, aka cancers, circulatory problems, and permanent, not temporary, permanent deterioration of the central nervous system. Oh, and here's the kicks and giggles right here. In most cases, these effects do not become evident until long after exposure, i.e. a decade or more.
Yeah.
Like, wow, right? This could explain a lot. This sounds like, oh, I don't know, the Jabberdew that came out 5 years ago. Heart attacks, clots, malignancies. I mean, it's a veritable banquet of any type of negative health effect that you could want that they could change and cause in our people with these frequencies. So now I've got it bookended. I got 1960. Russia's been able to do this with frequencies, and they recently did it in Havana right after Trump took office during the first term. And then I stumble into the sandwich part in the middle. 1994, April of 1994, Rwandan genocide, right? So on that day, I think it was April 6th of 94, the Rwandan president and all of his senior cabinet were on board a flight. It gets blown out of the sky. A hailstorm of cannon shells rips through the fuselage, downs the plane instantly. Everybody on board is dead. That's what we know for sure. What is also alleged is that our CIA was on the ground in Rwanda with people wearing badges posing as journalists who were actually there to foment dispute by way of a disinformation campaign, whereby our CIA agents told the Hutus, one of the tribes, oh, it's the Tutsi tribe that's responsible for the death of the president, and told the Tutsi tribe the exact opposite to get these guys having sort
Yeah.
of a gang warfare situation. And after a couple of weeks, the tribes are pissed off. They're like hurling rocks at each other, but they are not yet homicidal or genocidal. And then Operation Crimson Mist goes into effect, allegedly, and they lift these C-130 planes off the tarmac where they'd been camped out for a couple of weeks, and they fly them at very low altitude right over the top of all of the warring tribes with these retrofitted enormous microwave dishes that are beaming frequencies at the tribes. And at that point in time, they go into full genocidal rage mode and start killing, I don't know, like a quarter of their population by the end of this genocide 2 months later. So the notion that you could create a genocidal rage in a person's head by hitting them with certain types of frequencies sounds pretty out there. But they have actually been able to do that for a really long time. I'm not going to give you the footprint of the hertzes, but they have been able to hit a certain hertz frequency that will predictably cause depression in a subject. They can tweak the dial and go 1 hertz above that one and make you feel not depressed, but really high and happy, like you've had 5 drinks at a fraternity party. And then they can crank the dial 3 or 4 digits higher on the hertz scale and get riotous behavior is the direct quote. So this goes back, I thought this went back, okay, fine, to the 50s or 60s with Russia. Did you know, Paul, that it actually goes back to the 1800s? Had you heard that?
No, I didn't know it went back that far. The one thing that I've always heard is your microwave oven that you have in your house is a direct derivative of a weapon.
Yeah,
That it is the direct descendant of a weapon.
yeah.
And I'm going to let you just go talk about going back to the 1800s because you're on a roll here, Lee, and I don't like to interrupt you when you're on a roll.
Yeah, that's a blessing and a curse, the fact that my mouth gets on a roll. But fair enough. Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned the microwave oven. My mother in the 70s, when we got our first one, was like, "Don't you stand in the kitchen when I'm microwaving stuff." And I'm like, "Dude, if it's so darn bad, maybe we shouldn't be using it on our food." And she rarely did, to be fair. She was quite ahead of her time. But now we know just how bad those all types of beams can really be. So Nikola Tesla, the very poor Serbian Croatian guy who hopped a boat to New York City in the late 1800s, was standing in his apartment in New York City in 1898 and gets a bright idea to create a vibrating unit that he straps on to. I know this is starting to sound like a porno. It's not. Most people in America hear the word vibrating unit and strap on, and that's where their mind goes. But he was a clean liver. He's looking at his vibrator and going, "Let me see if I can create an earthquake, not take it to my bedroom." So he straps it to a steel beam in his apartment in New York City. And this thing's going, like a little, dog trying to like cover its, back end business. And it's vibrating. And he starts, being the crazy scientist. He goes and runs errands. And when he gets back a couple hours later, the police are breaking down his apartment door and pulling the vibrating unit off the steel beam he had attached it to in his apartment, because it had created, as he suspected it would, a vibration in the steel beam, which went down into the earth, which set off a chain reaction where it found a resonant frequency that started vibrating underneath, and now they're vibrating together, and it set off an earthquake on the 2 blocks on which his apartment was located. So they're like, "Yeah, dude, maybe you should pick up stakes and go somewhere else." At least that's, I'm assuming, how the conversation went. Because the next thing you hear is he's no longer in New York City after that little stunt. He did it a couple times on a pier, on another building, and I'm pretty sure he got run out of Dodge on a rail, and he pops up in Colorado Springs in 1900, where he decides he is going to beam these incredibly low frequency waves, not high frequency, low frequency waves, into the ground just to see what happens, because he's a crazy scientist. So he does this. He's beaming these low frequency waves into the ground, and 25 miles away, there are 200 street lamps that Edison's crew have set up, and they're standalone street lamps with bulbs in them, but they're not wired to the grid yet. They've just set them on the ground. They're not wired to anything. They can't turn on the light, basically. But Tesla gets to doing his little electronic wave thing. 25 miles away from Tesla, all of Edison's street lamps turn on, even though they're not attached to anything, for like days. And all of the moths and the butterflies at night, when they're like winging around, have little blue St. Elmo's fire halos of fire shooting out of their wings when they're pumping their little wings. People are like, "What the heck? These aren't lightning bugs. Why do butterflies have halos?" And then the most fantastic phenomenon that resulted from his experiment is the soccer moms of the 1900s go to turn on their tap to wash their dishes, right? And out shoots fire from their kitchen faucet instead of water. So yeah, extremely low frequency waves beamed into the earth can create all sorts of funny business. And when you come forward into the 1950s and 80s, you stumble across the work of Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher Bies. Crazy scientist, super smart, Einstein of her day, but she was female, so she probably didn't get the accolades Einstein did. She is a nuclear physicist. She is an astrophysicist. She has more degrees and patents on frequency stuff than I can choke a horse with. As a Berkeley undergrad in the 50s, she was studying nuclear fusion. She was the only woman there. She ends up at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Lab, at Lawrence Livermore Labs, attached to Berkeley. NASA and our DoD pick her up. And finally, I think it's the 60s maybe, and she's teaching a class at Berkeley. And she and her crazy scientist husband have built this little beamer thing. And they get the permission of the kids in her class, these little astrophysicists in training up at UC Berkeley, to be experimented on. And the kids are like, yeah, sure. So she beams half the class with a frequency. And immediately they are all violently, uncontrollably shaking and shivering like they're outside in a snowstorm, and their teeth are chattering uncontrollably. And the other half of the class, Paul, looks at the disturbed half of the class and goes, huh, so how much teach did you have to pay those guys to put on this Oscar performance? Like, what kind of a party trick is this? And she says to him, oh, you don't believe? And she swings her little equipment over on the non-believing side of the class, and now the whole damn class is violently reduced to a chattering, smithering, whatever. So this is Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher-Bies. And in the 1980s, CNN's correspondent Chuck Del Caro does a 3 or 4 part series on frequencies, like I'm talking about today, and how they can be used for bad or for good, mainly for bad, and the military applications of this. And as part of his series and his expose, he agrees to go into this woman's lab where her and her husband put a blindfold on him. They muffle his ears with some sort of, muffler, so he can't see anything, he cannot hear anything. And he agrees to let this woman and her husband beam electrical magnetic waves into his brain that are carrying on the signal geometric shapes. And I'm going to play the video right now. It's just an excerpt from the CNN piece. And you can actually hear him. The instruction to him is, hey, go ahead, and whenever you see something in your mind's eye, you're going to call out the geometric shape you see. The audio is a little bit muffled because it's from 50 years ago almost. And you hear the correspondent go, oh my gosh, I just saw a parabola fly by. So here we go.
CNN enlisted the help of noted physicist Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher and electrical engineer Bill Van Weiss to build and test an RF mine interference machine from data found in Soviet scientific literature. The machine itself was inexpensive and easy to construct, using parts from a consumer electronics store. It emits a weak magnetic field, pulsed at extremely low frequency. As the subject of the test, I was blindfolded and my ears were blocked. A magnetic probe was placed about 18 inches from my head. 2 signal generators produced waveform patterns that were transmitted by the magnetic probe.
Describe anything that you see here.
Parabola just went by. Later, I asked Van Weiss what a weapon using this technology could do.
Induce basically what would be considered hallucinations in people, direct them to do things against their so-called better judgment.
How easy would it be to assemble a weapon from existing off-the-shelf parts?
In 3 weeks, I could put together a weapon that would take care of a whole town.
CNN.
So that was the actual quote from the guy. But when they interviewed the female, who was the real brains behind the operation, she said, give me the money and 3 months' time, and I will be able to affect the behavior of 80% of the people in any town in America. Make them happy, or at least they'll think they're happy, or make them aggressive. MIT comes out 5 years ago, right before COVID, and they are boasting that they have a laser and they can beam it at people and make them hear anything they want them to hear that is not going on in the outside world. So literally, me and my husband and my friends could be lined up like ducks in a row at a movie theater, and if they beam this thing at my head, MIT was boasting about it, you can Google the headlines, they beam it at my head, I will start hearing whatever they want me to hear, and my neighbors that are shoulder to shoulder with me will not hear that. When I got done doing this research, Paul, I looked at my spouse and I said, honey, I feel so damn bad. Every time we drive through a bad area of LA and I see these crazy paranoid schizophrenics standing on a street corner with their foil hat on, screaming about how the government is making them, hallucinate and beaming shit at their head and making them crazy. I just assumed that they were a paranoid schizophrenic. Apparently, we've had the technology and the ability to do that since longer than I've been alive. Like, this is crazy town, right? I mean...
Well, Lee, it's not crazy town. That's the problem. This is not the problem. What we do know is in the 50s and 70s, they were very loose-lipped. They let out so much information. Now, this sort of information is being heavily restricted.
Yeah.
And another rabbit hole for you to go down, which I'm don't hate me for this. I've done an interview with a gentleman called Jesse Beltran, who is a specialist in nanotechnology, and he's been literally researching about nanotech. Gone are the days of these little pills that are in our arms and things like that. They're less than a hair length, and they react to frequency. And he's got a declassified government document where they experimented on prisoners down in South America, put these nanoparticles inside them, and then started using frequencies just to really help things along, shall we say. And they induced all sorts of behaviors. And, you know, Nikola Tesla, the guy was a complete genius. Complete genius. Obviously, that's why, dare I say it, he had to be dealt with, is the only way to describe it.
Yeah.
Going on.
The military applications that you're talking about and the fact that our government's been using it for a long time, it was a bit of an open secret. CNN actually announced it. I have two more short clips that are probably a minute and a half combined where they talk about what they were doing and how they were doing it. You know, when I was in literally junior high with my hair out to here wearing neon colors in the 80s, but yeah, you're absolutely right. They do react. I mean, everybody's a walking antenna at this point. We've all got little antennas in our pockets. We're all heavy metal doused from the chemtrails, from the exposures in food. They're talking about there's 5 times the amount of aluminum in all of our farmland and our food than there should be because of what's coming out of the chemtrails in the skies. I mean, and now they're admitting to the geoengineering. We've heard Trump make oblique reference to it. Bobby Kennedy came out recently and said, we finally figured out now that we're in office who's behind this. Again, it's DARPA. But yeah, this is like a perfect storm. You know, you can beam it at our head, and now we're extra susceptible because we're like a walking metal box, even though we're supposed to be human beings with not much metal in our bodies. So crazy stuff. But yeah, if you want, I've got one more CNN clip that's kind of scary, and I can pop that up real quick before we get to the good stuff and leave people on a happier note.
Please do, Lee. Please do. Also,
Okay,
I'm just going to add on to this.
Yeah.
Within the last 2 to 3 years, they've added 12 new types of cloud formation. And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I never saw ripples in the clouds. Never.
Right.
Now we have
Right.
ripples in the clouds. The facts
Oh,
are out.
I know. It's crazy. And you know, I really take it upon myself when I'm out with my daughter who's 21, so she still remembers normal clouds, to point out what an actual cirrus and a cumulus cloud look like. The cumulus are the puffy, and then you've got the anvil clouds that like are a thunderhead, you know, shaped like an anvil and stuff. When I took a class in college, those were the 3 types of clouds. You had the anvil that you watch out before thunderstorms. You had the big, pretty fluffy white ones, the cumulus, and you had the cirrus that are a little more hazy. But in no event did they have the tic-tac-toe clouds where you saw, you know, jets flying at low altitudes over your head, making what looks like tic-tac-toe in the sky. But of course, that's what we're seeing all the darn time. And I have no doubt that there are military applications for us. And I also have no doubt that they're likely experimenting on civilian populations without our permission, because as you can hear in this next 2 CNN clips, they were basically admitting to such or refusing to admit to such, which is all you need to know, when Chuck Del Caro did an interview back in the 80s. Can I play this clip real quick?
Yes, 100%, Lee. We're on a
All
roll.
right. Here we go.
We showed the results of our test to Dr. Robert Becker, a 2-time Nobel nominee for his work in the biological effects of electromagnetism.
Could markedly influence the operations of a fighter pilot. The effect of that upon the efficiency with which an Army, an Air Force, or a Navy would operate would be catastrophic.
Chuck DeCaro.
Catastrophic effects, this is in the 80s, on not just our fighter pilot guys, but as well the electronics within these fighter jets. And you know, it's funny, right when I was doing this first deep dive, we had just had a fighter jet go down on the East Coast here in America, and they were like, everybody was like, mainstream media is like, we don't understand how that happened. I'm like, well, maybe it's not such a stretch to think that somebody beamed it out of the sky, you know, Star Trek style. Yep. The final words from Chuck Del Caro, he talks about the State Department and some classified operations from DOD and State Department. It's only another 60 seconds. I'm going to cue it up right now if you're cool with that.
She stated that the research was carried out on orders from the Soviet government. Is the United States military working in the field of electronic mind control? Officially, the Department of Defense will not comment because the subject area is, quote, too sensitive. But CNN has learned from this government scientist, who did not want to be identified, that a Navy laboratory conducted research into the use of an RF device for for counterterrorism and special operations.
It's possible to entrain a certain percentage of a population, apparently, with weak magnetic fields.
The study also showed that RF signals could dissolve certain types of rat brain cells at a distance, causing disorientation and nausea. According to the scientists, even though the program was successful, the government never followed up on it. The Department of Defense will not comment about Soviet RF weapons. However, experts interviewed by CNN say that the Soviets are apparently ahead and could exploit that lead in a surprise strategic move. A move that could have grave consequences for the United States. This is Chuck DeCaro, CNN Special Assignments.
Yeah, so you know how our government feels when any other country gets ahead of them in an arms race. I am very certain after CNN did that little series when I was in junior high school 40 some odd years ago, that our DOD and everybody else over back east were in a race to the finish to see if we could get the technology. And I mean, what could go wrong? They were admitting at the time they could already dissolve rat brain cells. The Soviets had admitted, they were on the record saying they can nuke a cow's brain basically from 3 miles out, just beam a weapon, through the airwaves over to the cow, and the cow's brain just sort of explodes and disintegrates. So they've had this for a very long time, but as with anything, it's, it can be used for good, it can be used for bad. I'd like to actually read you a quote about the Russian who created a lot of this stuff back in the 50s, because it opens the door to some healing frequency stuff that I know Charlie's big on. And I know we're probably getting up to on that 30-minute mark. I'd like to go maybe another 10 minutes to leave people with the pause.
Of course. Lee, we're seriously on a roll here, and you're talking about a subject that I've been down the rabbit hole many times before. And trust me, it's taken me into all sorts of directions. And I now understand that a lot of this technology is all interlinked. I mean, in the UK, it's well known, if it's cloudy and rainy, we are all miserable. When it's sunny, we're all happy. Concentration of aluminum in the skies, I don't know. But what I will say as well is RFK did an interview just recently, probably in the last 3-4 months, where he was asked about chemtrail geoengineering, and he said, we have found out they are putting it directly in the jet fuel. It's directly in the jet fuel. And he said this publicly. So they are massively aware of it. We know there are people working behind the scenes to save the human race, because when you look at where we're heading to, it's a techno race where we will not be in control of our own thoughts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I praise God every day that Bobby is where he is and that Trump is where he is, and that we're finally starting to get high level information out to the little people, all of us who don't have classified clearances, so that we know what's going on, because information is power. I firmly believe that people who know more do better. That's why I'm such a, fervent scholar myself, and once I stumble on it, I have I think a kind of unique knack of taking high level stuff, probably because I'm kind of stupid on this stuff, and it takes me a while to integrate it and synergistically wade through it. And after I get done turning my brain into a noodle, I'm like, well, now that I understand it at a 3rd grade level, because I am not an astrophysicist, why should I let this go to waste? I got a good mouth on me. I can explain it in 3rd grade speak, so all the rest of my friends can avoid having to do a 2-week term paper on the stuff that I just started to do over 15 minutes one lunch one day. But yeah, Kaznechev, back to this brilliant researcher in the Soviet Union. I'm going to read this quote because it's fascinating. They said the Kaznechev experiments in the Soviet Union proved that any cellular disease and death pattern, any cellular disease or death pattern can be induced by a specific electromagnetic pattern carried on a specific electromagnetic signal if the target cells are bombarded with the pattern carrying carrier signals for a sufficient length of time. So basically, they can get a signal that carries this signature stamp of death and disease, any type of anything, probably cancer, infertility, nuke your brain from the inside out, whatever it is. And if they bombard your cells long enough with this wave that has this thing encoded into it, they can create any illness, sickness, or death that they desire at the other end where you're being bombarded. That's the bad news. Here's the rest of the quote. What was not published of Kazanchev's work was his corresponding work showing electromagnetic reversal of cellular death and disease conditions. So he had the ability to kill you or disease you but he had also found the equal and opposite electromagnetic wave to fix the thing that they induced. And right when he was discovering it, bubbled up to the surface and immediately got suppressed. Fast forward 20 years, it's now early 1970s. I'm like in diapers. A French doctor by the name of Antoine Priore, Priore, took upon himself finishing the work that Kosnichev had started. He built a little machine, kind of like Rife Resonator medbed style, like a little shoebox, and he realized he could induce cancer in a rat or a monkey or whatever, and he'd pop the animal in the machine. He did say he needed the entire body of the animal, including the tail, to be inside the machine and all of the hair. That fascinated me, Paul, because we hear over and over, oh, after your hair leaves its, little head follicle area, it's dead. And I'm like, okay, if your hair were truly dead, why the heck would this French doctor need to shove all the hair in the machine to cure the disease, right? Like he should be able to leave the dead hair outside the machine, right? For the long-haired ladies, but no. So he finds out that he makes this little box, this shoebox. He's curing rats of everything. Cancer, any disease known to man, brain disorders, neurodegenerative. And he gets backing from a bunch of French billionaires at the time. Again, this is in the 70s. And he builds this 4-story tall device that's big enough to put a human inside, not a little tiny rat. And right when it's going to be released to the world, for all of our, wins and successes, the kibosh gets put on it and it goes underground. And, it's just fascinating. I have a pastor friend who calls these things celestial technologies. And we are blessed to be living in an era where now people know, yes, the frequency stuff is really scary. They can nuke you or make you think you're a paranoid schizophrenic and hear stuff that's not happening in the real world or see stuff that's not happening in the real world. But we are also living in an era where, so this guy, this crazy Hungarian researcher creates this water, gives it to his daughter, and presto bingo, all of a sudden there's no more cancer cells in her body. And he decides, okay, that's a pretty good result considering my daughter was at death's door and now she's fine. So he makes it available in like a Medi-Spa sort of situation in Hungary. And he packages the water for drinking and he starts putting people in baths of this water, 3 1-hour baths a day, and you drink a few glasses of this water. And lots of people who are in a similar position to his daughter are suddenly feeling much better. They have cancer cells. On repeat tests, they can't find the cancer cells. Then he gets an autism kid, which friends of mine who are now bringing this water to America, they were there because they had cancer. They're doing the protocol in Hungary or whatever. And they see this 14-year-old autistic boy walk in, and he's stemming, and he's violent, and he's nonverbal. And my friend's a big believer in communication. So she treats him like he's totally normal with some exaggerated communication. And every morning she says to this violent teenage autistic boy, hello, and uses his name. And he doesn't acknowledge her. And, he's acting like a full go stemming autistic kid, which is what he is. And on the 4th day, he looks at her and is like, hello. And she looks at the mom, and the mom in broken English, they were from Armenia, is crying and saying, oh my gosh, my boy, he never spoke. And this morning he says, Mom, I love you. And he also never hugged. You know how autistics are. Yeah. He hugged me. And by the end of the week, the little brother is coming in to say, older brother, it's time for your bath. And the kid is coloring inside the lines, uses his left hand to say, in a minute, and speaking. 3 things that he was completely constitutionally incapable of doing at the beginning of the week before the bath started, along with the water. So then they start looking at people's blood under the microscope. This is a picture of a woman's blood before she drinks this oxygen water. As you can see from the picture, her blood cells look like the Hawaiian island chain. If you know nothing about blood cells, know this much. Your blood under a microscope should not look like the Hawaiian Islands. She drinks a glass of this water, repeats the blood draw, and this is now her blood after a glass of the water. So at this point, the University of Italy is fascinated. They have a woman my age, comes in, she ran her thumb through, I don't know, a cheese grater. She ends up slicing off sort of the edge of her thumb, heads up, a little bit of a gory photo coming up, but they put the oxygen water in with her thumb when they bandage it, not because they expect anything crazy, but just because they figure, well, the high oxygen content may actually, speed the healing up like hyperbaric chambers do when you've had a brain injury or something like that. So this is the picture of her missing thumb tip. They undo the bandage a week or 2 later. Her thumb has regrown. her
Wow.
thumb regrew. And
Wow.
all of the doctors in Italy are like, what just happened? I mean, if you've ever had a third grade science class, Paul, you and I both heard the same thing. Mr. Jones telling us, hey, little kids, be very careful in shop class in high school. Don't cut off one of your fingers because we are not starfish or salamanders. That stuff won't regrow if you lop it off. Okay. Well, newsflash, University of Italy doctors are like, we also thought that digits couldn't regrow. They pull back the curtain on this, and what they discovered is the very high level of oxygen in the water actually reactivated a gene in our bodies that goes dormant after childbirth. The gene is responsible for giving us our flippers, all of our fingers, all of our toes, all of our arms, all of our legs. After we're born, the gene's like, peace out, my work here is done. I'm going to go hibernate until you die. Well, apparently that gene was reactivated in this woman who cut off the tip of her thumb, such that she now has a perfectly normal thumb again. So again, I'm not here to say that you're going to have this result. You cannot not make any promises. You can't make any representations, but they are bringing this water to America. If you're interested in getting a case of the water yourself, it's available on my website. My name is spelled differently than the average Lee. My mother decided to make it hard for all of us to remember how to spell my name. She gave me extra letters. It is Leigh Dundas, Dundas, LeeDundas.com. You go to that healthy living page, and magic presto, you too can drink some of this water, because newsflash, the more toxic we are and the older we are, even if we weren't toxic at all, but all of us are getting older every day and more toxic every day living on this planet, it inhibits the ability to use oxygen in our system. And if you know anything about health, if you want disease to grow in a petri dish, deprive it of oxygen and put toxins in there. You want to stop disease in its track, give it more oxygen, give it some vitamin C, and put some good stuff, some sunlight, some fresh air in there, and you get sort of much better results. So that's the first celestial technology that's sort of out to help counteract some of these things that they're probably doing to us without our knowledge. The second thing that's out there, and I'll leave, this will be my closing note in case you're wondering how long is this crazy woman that's with Paul today going to talk, is stem cell, not the patches. I've heard good things about the dermal patches. That's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about actual injections using a needle to put the stem cell into people's body like you and me, Paul. Do you mind if I just close on this note real quick?
Oh, come on, Lee. You know by now you can say this. We've met in person. We've had many interviews. Of course you can close on this.
Thank you, sir. So basically, I know all of your viewers who have heard the word Lee Dundas before probably think that I sprouted fully formed with a Walmart bullhorn in my hand in 2020 to call out the crazy. But prior to that, I actually, as I mentioned at the outset of this interview, because you kindly asked me for a quickie on my background, I actually had a career that didn't involve a Walmart bullhorn. And I was a lawyer, as I mentioned, but my husband is actually a physician. And he, for the last 10 years almost now, had an office that did stem cell injections. So in our country, the FDA opened an experimental window back in the 20 teens where they said, hey, we're hearing some good stuff about these stem cell injections. We're not going to give it the stamp of approval from the FDA, but we are going to tell the doctors in this country, if you get informed consent from the patient and the patient wants to do stem cell and you, the doctor, want to give it to them, if everybody's on the same page, you can play ball, particularly for musculoskeletal conditions. But you cannot use it from aborted fetuses. So all the Christians like me in the audience, if you're going, ew, yeah, Planned Parenthood, broken baby body parts, you can't get that kind of stem cell in America, nor should you be able to. That's gross and weird and not ethical and not very good spiritually, I think. But you can take it from the umbilical cord. So if you don't know much about us women when we give birth, because everybody gets excited about the whole baby part of the, that's kind of the climax, as it were, of the whole birth process. Baby comes out of our body. The doctor's like, yay, it's a girl. And the nurses are like, yay, she's so pretty. We're going to get her cleaned up. And your husband's like, oh, honey, she looks like you. And when all of that's going on, our body's like, yo, we don't need this umbilical cord or the placenta anymore. Let's get this stuff out the back door too while we're at it. And all of that stuff comes out. It's very ugly. It's not real pretty. It's an anti-climax. You got a healthy baby boy or girl. Nobody's looking at the placenta and the umbilical cord. And newsflash for the boys in the audience, we don't need it. It's like a third kidney. You kind of don't need the umbilical cord hanging out inside the woman's body for the rest of your life. Nor do we, it would be handy to keep it so we could kind of lasso the toddlers, but we don't even do that with that. The hospital just throws it in the medical waste bin. And then about, I don't know, 20 years ago, some brilliant guy was like, yo, this stuff like the umbilical cord is really, really rich in stem cell. Maybe we should harvest the stem cell before we just chuck it in the trash. And they started doing that. So that is called umbilical stem cell. So your umbilical cord is going to hit the trash anyway. There's no religious ethical objections to take the stem cell out of it before it hits the trash. And they started putting these things into people's bodies, and they were getting amazing results. You have bone on bone knees where, you know, the little old lady has no black line of cartilage between her thigh bone and her two lower leg bones. You do a stem cell shot, now you can actually see the black line of cartilage because her cartilage grew back in her knee, which is a far preferable thing to having somebody use a bandsaw and put metal parts in your knee. That's kind of gross, and people die on the table. It's kind of violent. So that is what we were doing, and we were getting absolutely amazing results. People ask all the time, I don't know, it sounds like hocus pocus. Does it really work? Here is a racehorse from your neck of the woods, Paul. This is a racehorse in England. He had a career and life-ending injury. He nicked his flexor tendon on his front leg with his back hoof in the middle of a race. They put the gray shield up around him on the track. They were getting ready to shoot him in the head. It was that bad of an injury. All of the people in your neck of the woods, Paul, were like, don't shoot our favorite horse. We hear these good things about stem cell technology. There's things that can help. So that's like, all right, go ahead and do a stem cell injection. Maybe we can avoid a bullet to this horse's head, and he can go retire to the back 40 and graze out his days happy with people petting him. They do the stem cell injection. Not only do they spare him a bullet in the brain, that horse is vertical, he is weight bearing, he is walking, he is running. And a year later, they raced this horse who should have been shot flat out on the track in a 4.2 mile, 22 steeple jump race, and he wins. He wins the race. So yeah, when it can grow your tendon back together when you're a racehorse who should have been shot, it tells you how very efficacious it is. And this is the newer headline. A year ago, 2024, April 2nd last year, ABC 7 News is in the backyard of a surfer in San Diego who was a quadriplegic. He took a header off his surfboard, broke his neck, paralyzed from the neck down, and he is now, wait for it, walking around his backyard with a cane as a quadriplegic because they did stem cell on his back. So it's very, very exciting stuff. If you have a bum knee, if you have a torn tendon, torn muscle, a low functioning kidney, you know, you name it, it can be used for any type of condition, autoimmune. Anyway, long story short, when we were fighting for the right to breathe oxygen, the FDA came along and said, yo, you are stealing way too many patients away from the orthopedic surgeons and pharma. We don't like it. We're going to shut it down. In May of 22, they made it illegal in the US by not extending that experimental window. Were doctors still doing it? Of course they were. It was back alley abortion style. They're like, we'll just do it until we get caught because we know it works and the patient's going to pay it and the patient wanted it. But we weren't doing it because I don't do things illegally. I will call out an unconstitutional law, but I'm not a criminal. And then a year ago, the state of Utah, God bless the state of Utah, said, you know what, federal government, you can take a long walk off a short pier. We know this stuff works. You want to play ball in the state of Utah, you can do stem cell all day long as it's not from an abortion. If it's from the umbilical cord, you are good to go. So we are now back in business. We used to be in 7 states, my husband's office was. Now we're just in Salt Lake City, Utah. We're doing stem cell. We treated our own paralyzed patient from the chest down the week before Thanksgiving last year. He is allegedly about ready to learn to walk again. It is working phenomenally well. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to let you hear this from the horse's mouth. If you are interested in learning more about stem cell, again, you can go to my website, leedundis.com, click on the Healthy Living page, and you can sign up to get more data on stem cell. I think our last treatment window is going to be in November here, but this is a 30-second clip from a tech executive that got it done himself. Here we go.
Yeah, for only 3 weeks, this is amazing. I can turn my head left to right without having a chiropractic adjustment before and after. Daily, sometimes multiple times a day, stress hot in the neck. That would then lead to a headache and make me a kind of grumpy person. Grumpy Gus was a term used on one of my reviews. So I had to kind of like moderate myself and eat more aspirin. Since the shots, 0. This is amazing. You know, I mean, I'm talking 20 years I've been dealing with this.
So that's that. I know you all love me when I'm chasing human traffickers and pedophiles and taking child brothels in Asia out of commission and fighting off the tyranny in your backyard when they're trying to mask and vax your kid. but I actually had a career before that that paid the bills. I drive a Mazda, not a Mercedes, even though I live in Orange County. All the extra money that I make goes directly into saving the planet. But to keep our lights on, we do have a real business. That's our real business. And if you've got a bodily problem because you're 40, 50 years old, I say now is the time to get it addressed. We never know how long this window is going to last. Make hay while the sun shines. These are celestial technologies. They are amazing things that we can avail ourselves of. And there is absolutely no reason that a truth-telling freedom fighter should be suffering or dying a premature death. We need you in good health for as long as you can possibly live, because this war ain't over, and we need you to be able to take on the tyrants in your neck of the woods. So you need your knees and your hips working and your brain. So don't delay, don't dally. Learn more about this stuff. LeeDundas.com. Go to the Healthy Living page. And God bless the people who allow the truth tellers to tell the truth. We would be nothing without the Charlie Wards and the Paul Bookers of the world. So thank you again for giving me the mic today, Paul. It's always such a pleasure to be on your show.
No problems at all, Lee. Thank you as always for being on the show. Thank you everybody for tuning in today. And we're going to put Lee's website down below in the description. So all that's left for me to say is to take care, God bless, and we'll see you all next time. Bye now.